Amina, I think we can kick off the meeting.
Start. Hello, Excellencies, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, and friends. Welcome to this very important meeting. So what we will have in the next 90 minutes is, the next 90 minutes online event is in support of UN International Biodiversity Day, which was celebrated on 31st of May, with the theme of We Are Part of the Solution. In May 2021, the United Nations System Chief Executives Board for Coordination, the CEB, endorsed a common approach to integrating biodiversity and nature-based solutions for sustainable development into the UN policy and program planning and delivery. Through this common approach, the UN system commits to mainstream biodiversity and catalyze collective actions to address the drivers of and restore biodiversity in view of achieving the 2050 vision of living in harmony with nature. This builds on previous commitments by representatives from 51 UN entities, which, under the auspices of the UN Environment Management Group, prepared a report that defines a roadmap with timely actions to support government and relevant stakeholders in delivering on a decade of actions for biodiversity. The UN systems expressed a shared recognition of the urgency to act and to facilitate the implementation of the Post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework in alignment with the 2030 Agenda and the Paris Agreement. This virtual dialogue will launch the above-mentioned UN report in support of countries and in moving from commitment to action for transformative system change to halt the loss and to restore biodiversity. So today we have the great pleasure of having two main keynote speakers, and we have the great honor to welcome Honorable Minister Yasmin Fouad from Egypt and Mr. Liu Ning, Deputy Director General from the Department of Nature and Ecology Conservation, Minister of Ecology and Environment of China. And prior to this, we'll have the great honor of welcoming Lydia Noronha to give us the breakdown of the event and provide the introductory remark of the CEB and the EMG processes. Thus, further along the highlight, of course, we will see how this event unfolds. So without further ado, I will ask Lydia Noronha to take us through this session for today. Lydia, the floor is yours.
Good morning. Thank you very much, Ms. Fakim. Excellencies, heads of UN agencies, ladies and gentlemen, a very good morning to all of you. Good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. And again, welcome to the dialogue on the UN system support to the Global Biodiversity Agenda. As you just heard from Ms. Fakim, on 4th May, the United Nations System Chief Executive Board endorsed a common approach to integrating biodiversity and nature-based solutions in sustainable development. This approach builds on the previous commitments by representatives of 51 UN agencies under the auspices of the UN Environment Management Group. And this report, which is titled Supporting the Global Biodiversity Agenda, a United Nations System Commitment for Action to Assist Member States Delivering the Post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework. What you will hear then today, ladies and gentlemen, is the UN system commitment and shared recognition of the urgency to address the loss of biodiversity. Biodiversity is in alarming decline around the world, with 1 million species at the risk of extinction, 2 million hectares of land degraded, 2/3 of the ocean adversely affected by human disturbance, and an estimated 420 million hectares of forests lost worldwide through deforestation since 1990. The assessments have shown us repeatedly that human activities are responsible for this biodiversity loss through unsustainable patterns of consumption and production. As our SG stated, the goals that have been set for 2030 and beyond for conserving and sustainably using nature and achieving sustainable development will not be achieved under current trajectories. It is important, therefore, to reverse this decline. Ladies and gentlemen, our economic possibilities, and in fact, the human development journey itself, is circumscribed by the human impacts on the Earth system. To have humans at the center of sustainable development as agreed in Rio +20 and in Agenda 2030 requires us to ensure that the environmental conditions for our well-being are met, or else we diminish the possibilities for the human journey and for our children and grandchildren. No amount of technological progress alone will enable this continued growth without attention to biodiversity, climate change, and degradation. The UN system, therefore, is committed to collaborate and provide support and expertise to countries while integrating biodiversity into its own policies, programs, and operations. As clearly stated in the EMG report, supporting the Global Biodiversity Agenda, the UN can play a key role in the implementation of the Post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework and the SDGs, with a focus on improving enabling conditions, access to relevant data, and means of implementation at the national level. To the recently adopted UN Common Approach, which you just heard, the UN system commits to mainstream biodiversity and catalyze and collective action to address the drivers of biodiversity loss, restore ecosystems, and ultimately live in harmony with nature. This common approach, along with the report, provides the normative framework in a result-based structure to organize collective action and joint delivery to mainstream biodiversity and nature-based solutions. Human rights are central to the approach, recognizing the intergenerational right to a healthy environment, contributing to the implementation of the Secretary General's vision and call to action on human rights. The approach also speaks to the contribution to green and inclusive economic recovery and strengthen institutions, accountability, and justice. By leveraging the expertise, collaboration, potential, and convening power of the United Nations system, we seek to support the reversal of the biodiversity loss with a view to address the COVID recovery, but also the implementation of the Post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework as agreed in Kunming, and in alignment with the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development and the Paris Agreement. Thank you very much for your attention. Ms. Fakim, over to you.
Thank you, Lydia, for setting the scene. We have two speakers, but I think we are just waiting for the second speaker to join. So may I ask the speaker from China to start the presentation? And we have for the Deputy Director General from China, Mr. Liu Ning, who is from the Department of Nature and Ecology Conservation, Ministry of Ecology and Environment of China, and also host government of CBD COP15. Mr. Ning, the floor is yours.
Okay, I just switch on. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Your Excellency, Ms. Amina Fakim. Thank you, Ms. Lydia Norona. My name is Liu Ning. Good afternoon, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. It's my great honor to attend this webinar on behalf of the Ministry of Ecology and Environment of China and the incoming presidency of the 15th Conference of the Parties to the Convention on Biodiversity to introduce the preparation process of COP15. I would also like to hear the valuable suggestions from all participants on biodiversity and nature-based solution and supporting timely actions for biodiversity conservation. On the International Day for Biological Diversity, A few days ago, China hosted a series of events and activities, including a ministerial roundtable co-hosted with the CBD Secretariat and an offline promotional event in Beijing in order to raise the public's awareness of biodiversity conservation and boost the road to COP15. As we all know, biodiversity is the basis for the survival and the development of mankind, as well as the lifeblood and the foundation of the shared future for all life on Earth. However, with the increasing expansion of human activities, the current global rate of species extinction is accelerating, and the loss of biodiversity and the degradation of ecosystem pose a major risk to human survival and development. The COVID-19 pandemic reminds us that mankind and nature are a community of shared future. We must deeply review the relationship between mankind and nature, strengthen biodiversity conservation, and effectively maintain global biodiversity. It is a huge systematic project to maintain the stability of the ecosystem and promote the conservation and the sustainable use of biodiversity. It requires efforts and contributions from everyone. We must clearly realize that only by the concerted effort of the whole society, respecting the concept of harmonious coexistence between human and nature, protecting nature and the ecological environment, like protecting our own eyes and coordinating the economic development and the ecological protection, can we seek sustainable development of humankind? The Chinese government has always attached great importance on the construction of ecological civilization and biodiversity conservation, and we cherish its importance to sustainable development. China's President Xi Jinping pointed out that biodiversity is an important basis, as well as the goal and the means for achieving sustainable development. In the past decade, China afforested a total of 70.39 million hectares of land and rehabilitated 17.76 million hectares of desert land. Ecological conservation right lines in China cover no less than 25% of the total land area. The area of all kinds of nature protected area exceeded 1.328 million square kilometers, accounting for more than 18% of terrestrial area, achieving the goal of protecting 70% of terrestrial area in Arctic target. 19% of terrestrial ecosystem types and 85% of key wild animal populations have been effectively protected, and the rare and endangered species have achieved restorative growth. Currently, the preparation work for the COP15 is in full swing and has made positive progress. Chinese President Xi Jinping addressed it in the United Nations Summit on Biodiversity last September that it falls to all of us to act together and urgently to advance protection and development in parallel, so that we can turn Earth into a beautiful homeland for all creatures to live in harmony. He also invited the global community to Kunming for the formulation of the new strategy on global biodiversity governance. The primary outcome of COP15 is to adopt the Post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework, which will provide new solutions and draw up a blueprint to address global biodiversity loss. The Post-2020 GBF will also facilitate the green recovery of economic during post-pandemic era, building a new ecological security system that meets the need of One Health approaches, thus to achieve the UN Sustainable Development Goals. There are only less than 5 months left before the COP15, but still a lot of work to be done. This requires us to gather the highest level of political wisdom. China deeply appreciates the UN system's effort to design a roadmap for action to support the member states in delivering on the post-2020 GBF. We are also looking forward to the launch of the UN Common Approach on Biodiversity and Nature-Based Solutions and the UN Environment Management Group's Biodiversity Report. Commitment is on fulfillment. Therefore, I think the following points are very important. The first point is to strengthen solidarity and work together. We should adhere to multilateralism and the principle of common but differentiated responsibilities. We need to actively build a bridge for dialogue between developed and developing countries and deepen the bilateral and multilateral dialogue on cooperation in the field of biodiversity conservation and green development. In this way, push all parties to go towards one common goal and increase consensus. The second is to be comprehensively and pragmatic, seeking common ground while resolving differences. It is necessary to formulate a comprehensive, widely participated, transformative ambitions and practical post-2020 GBS. We should try as possible to set goals and targets that are quantifiable, measurable, and reportable. China is willing to maintain close communication with all parties and actively seek solutions to important issues such as resource mobilization, access to and benefit sharing of digital sequence information of generic resources. The third is to mobilize resources and increase contributions, upholding the concept of a community of all life on Earth for both human and nature and from the common interests of all mankind. It is expected to strengthen the public financial funds as the lead and the multi-channel funds as a supplement, and continues to increase investment and actively mobilize more resources to provide greater support for the conservation and the sustainable use of biodiversity. 2021 marks the 50th anniversary of the restoration of China's legitimate right at the UN. China will continue to uphold the UN-centered international system, deepen cooperation with the UN system and other countries in the world, practice multilateralism in real sense. Taking the COP15 as an opportunity, China will advance the mainstreaming of biodiversity, ensure a successful and landmark COP15, and promote the realization of the 2050 vision of living in harmony with nature. I thank you all. Thank you, Madam Fakim.
Thank you. Thank you so much for this very, very powerful message, Mr. Liu. We take note and also would like to thank the Chinese government for hosting COP15 and also stressing the nexus of our livelihood, the sustained livelihood of mankind, and also our own well-being, which is directly linked to the preservation of our biodiversity. So thank you again for a very powerful message. I now have the pleasure of welcoming our second keynote speaker, who is Honorable Mrs. Yasmin Fouad, Minister of Egypt and President of the CBD COP14. Ms. Yasmin Fouad, the floor is yours. I think Ms. Fouad is trying to connect. Dr. Yasmin? Okay. Hello?
Yes, hi, this is Inga.
I think, Amina, I think we
Yes.
have Inger's confirmation of attendance. I heard her voice.
Okay, thank you. Do we have Dr. Yasmin?
We are waiting for her to attend. I thought of benefiting from this small opportunity maybe to introduce the menti.com polling, and then
Yes, I think
when
we'll
she
do
comes
that.
back,
Yeah.
yes,
Okay.
yes, please go ahead.
Yeah. Okay. Just 1 second. So while we're waiting for our second keynote speaker, we have a few questions, an online survey on menti.com, and we have 4 questions that we'd like to put to the audience and we'd like the feedback. Can we have the first question, please? So the first question we have is, what are the 3 top biodiversity nexus areas you would like to collaborate on? You can select 3. Like your feedback? Okay. Right. Okay, so we have sustainable consumption, production, then the right to health, right, okay, mischange, right. Okay, can we take, yeah? Right.
Matilda, can you take us to
Yes.
the following questions?
Yeah. The second question is, what are some of the barriers the UN faces to integrating biodiversity in its policies and programming? You can select 3. Political will, funding. Okay. Right. We'll come back to the questions after our keynote speaker who has joined us. So may I request Dr. Yasmin to present her keynote? The floor is yours.
Miss Amina?
Yes.
we have still some connection issues with Egypt. So
okay, so we go through the questions again.
And maybe we can proceed also with the panelists speakers if we have still a continued problem with the connection with Egypt, and we can accommodate the minister when she arrives.
So do you want us to finish the questions and then we go to the panelist?
The last questions, and then we go to the panelists. Yes.
Okay. Okay. So we'll go through the questions, and so we get the answers, and then we'll take we'll start with the panelist. So the questions we have was, with the decade of action towards UN 2030 agenda remaining, what support can the UN provide to accelerate action on nature? So we've had overwhelmingly, well, a big chunk, encouraging political will. Second is providing technical expertise and know-how, mobilizing financial and other resources, and providing a comparative narrative and awareness raising. Now the next question. What are the practical actions that the UN can put in place to better support the biodiversity agenda? Okay. Okay. We take the last one, the last question. Okay, we are saying important issues coming up: technical expertise, capacity building, awareness raising, accountability, private support engagement. Okay. Okay. The last question, we have reached the end. Okay. Thank you for all those who have participated in this survey, in this provide us with your feedback. Now we will go to the panel discussion, and we have 5 speakers. So we'll discuss from commitment to action, accountability, engagement for transformating system change to halt the loss and restore biodiversity. Our first speaker is Ms. Inga Anderson, Executive Director, United Nations Environment Programme. Ms. Anderson, the floor is yours.
Ms. Fakim, can you hear me?
Yes. Any problem, Lydia?
Yeah, I think Inga's having problems connecting. She's on the phone, but you still can't hear her. So she just sent me a message to read out her message. My apologies, but she's trying very hard to connect because this occasion and this particular session is very important for her. But let me, on her behalf, read out her key messages to this group. But rest assured that she is connected on the phone, but unable to speak. Ladies and gentlemen, excellencies, the executive director makes 4 important points. Her first one is that we need to mobilize and facilitate whole of society approaches, and we can do so as the United Nations. This is important to halt and reverse biodiversity loss. And in order to do this, the whole of society approach is really key. Collective UN action can reach a wide variety of audiences and beneficiaries, governments, businesses, civil society, to promote awareness and action on biodiversity and nature, but as well to shift national and sectoral policies and businesses and consumer practice. At the launch of the UN Decade on Ecosystem Restoration, the World Environment Day, we hope to mobilize governments, communities, and businesses to restore nature, creating really a network to act for nature. Her second key message is that UNEP brings together science, data, and expertise to accelerate these strategies for nature positive actions. And we saw very keenly just now in the Mentee how this is one of the key asks. In partnership with public and private actors, promote open access policies for biodiversity data, monitoring environmental change, and protecting biodiversity. Providing the data and information and tools for decision makers and citizens to carry forward the strategies that they choose in each of their countries. To launch Protected Planet Report last week, we provide scorecard on the quantity and quality of protected areas. We hope to increase accountability and transparency with the availability of the data. We have support through the IP-BEST with FAO, Unesco, and UNDP, and the advancement of climate science with WMO. All of these help contribute to the agenda of biodiversity. Our ambition really is to improve the integration of biodiversity analytics into the data infrastructure of the UN system, the MEAs, and wider global digital ecosystems for the planet. We hope to use the biodiversity data for decision-making, UN policy and program planning and delivery in public and private sectors. The UN Biodiversity Lab is a partnership between UNEP and UNDP to provide spatial data to governments to inform conservation decisions. And there is the ANCORE tool provided by UNEP, WNC, UNEP-FI, and partners to help finance institutions understand the risks and opportunities related to the exposure for ecosystem degradation. The Executive Director's message number 3 is that the UN system convenes dialogues on systemic challenges that can only be addressed through multilateral action. The UN can support governments and businesses to shift away from activities that deplete biodiversity towards those supporting ecosystem resilience, provide opportunities for nature-positive development pathways, bring awareness of systematic risks involved with nature loss, and promote measures to reduce the risks of future pandemics, support solutions that cannot be solved within national barriers, and have norms and standards for international systems of environmental and financial accounting. UNEP, working with UNDP and other partners, are establishing a task force on nature-related financial disclosure for the finance sector to become more aware and enhance transparency and exposure to nature-related risks. Her conclusion: it's not too late to halt and reverse the decline of biodiversity in ecosystems. The pandemic recovery must lead to transformation of society's relationship with nature. The protection and sustainable use of biodiversity has to be integrated into policies. And we need bold leadership and urgent actions across the whole of government and society. It's possible, but only together. Ladies and gentlemen, this is on behalf of Inga Anderson. My apologies again that she's unable to connect, but she's very much online, as you can see from the telephone number. Thank you very much, Amina, and over to you.
Thank you so much, Lydia, for reading the message from Ms. Anderson. And I think she really stresses out the message again for multilateralism, for action, for investment, for science. So thank you very much. We have the next speaker, Ms. Michelle Bachelet, the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights.
Thank you very much, Amina. Distinguished colleagues and friends, I'm glad to join you for the launch of these 2 important reports as well. My office was very pleased to contribute to both of them. We just celebrated International Biodiversity Day, which commemorates the adoption of the Convention on Biological Diversity on the 22 of May 1992. Now, nearly 30 years after the ambitious action states took in the early 90s to adopt the 3 Rio Conventions on biodiversity, climate change, and desertification, we face a tipping point. The environment is in crisis. Enjoyment of human rights now and in the future depends on how we act now. Biodiversity loss is caused by human activity, and it has enormous implications for human rights and human well-being. Furthermore, it isn't occurring in a vacuum. The Secretary General has referred to interlocked planetary crisis of biodiversity loss, pollution, and climate change, and has called them as suicidal war on nature. Its full impact looms ahead of us, but already the human toll is terrible. Displacement, hunger, thirst, suffering, premature death, the spread of infectious diseases. These are all part of the cost that's already being borne disproportionately by people who are already in disadvantageous situation. And that cost is growing, but we can push back. Environmental degradation and its impact are caused by humans, so we can prevent and address them. Putting human rights at the core of environmental action is a solution. The Secretary General's call to action for human rights summons us to enhance coordinated work across the entire UN system to achieve this objective by protecting environmental human rights defenders, advancing the human right to a healthy environment, and making environmental action more inclusive and participatory, among other key points. These elements of a human rights-based approach are reflected in the Environment Management Group's diversity report and the UN Common Approach on Biodiversity and Nature-Based Solutions. They constitute an excellent roadmap for the concrete action that we should take to stop biodiversity loss, reshaping our societies and our relationship to nature, so both people and our planet can flourish. It falls to us now as UN bodies to put these plans into action in our work and in support of states and other stakeholders. How do we do this? OHCHR and UNEP's joint key messages on human rights and biodiversity provide an outline. Participation, non-discrimination, and equality are critical. Indigenous peoples, local communities, and others who are most affected by diversity loss are often the best place to stop it. Women and girls will be empowered to adopt agricultural practices that foster biodiversity when their rights to equal access to land and livelihoods are upheld. UN bodies can promote environmental policymaking that not only consults, but also elevates the voices and practices of those who have traditionally been marginalized. We can support equitable and non-discriminatory land and water tenure and management practices, as well as agricultural policy. And we can take steps to uphold justice and accountability. Those who have contributed the least to biodiversity loss often suffer the worst impacts on their human rights. They need us to advocate for and enable biodiversity finance that is human rights-based, responsive to gender, and shaped by local needs, so that affected communities have the resources to repair damaged ecosystems. We can and should promote measures based on the guiding principles of business and human rights, which lead to real accountability for corporations and others who cause human rights harm through diversity loss. It is urgent for all of us to contribute to reshaping humanity's relationship with nature, to enable realization of the human rights to a safe, clean, healthy, and sustainable environment, support for sustainable development, and protection of the rights of future generations. The 2 reports being launched today present a detailed, doable case for action we can take. We need to realize their ambition in the future work of the UN Environment Management Group. And we need to support states and other stakeholders in bringing the same commitment and ambition to the development of the Post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework. Our future depends on it. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Michelle, for really stressing the point on human rights issues, access to biodiversity, access to life, access to all the resources that this nature provides us. And thank you for a very powerful message. We proceed now to the next speaker, Mr. Chudon Yu, Director General of the Food and Agriculture Organization, the FAO. The floor is yours, sir.
Thank you, Excellencies, colleagues, ladies and gentlemen. 2020 is the super year for nature. It gives us an opportunity to scale up action for greater coherence and ambitions for biodiversity. FAO is committed to the transformation to more efficient, inclusive, resilient, and sustainable agri-food system to deliver health, food, and prosperity for all while preserving our natural resources. This is fully reflected in our four organizational principles of the new FAO strategic framework: better production, better nutrition, a better environment, and a better life. Committed to the importance of biodiversity, FAO members adopted the FAO strategy on mainstreaming biodiversity across agricultural sectors and the 2021 to 2023 action plan to implement it. We are proud to be among the first UN agencies developed such an internal strategy. The strategy and action plan provide a roadmap and building blocks for the organization to reducing the negative impact of agricultural practice on biodiversity, promote sustainable agricultural practices, and conserve, enhance, preserve, restore, and sustainable use of biodiversity across agricultural sectors within productive landscape and seasonscape. Furthermore, we are strengthening our approach to environmental and social safeguards in programming. Yesterday, we launched the ambitious FAO Corporate Environmental Responsibility Strategy for the next decade. In it, we committed to reducing the greenhouse gas footprint of our operations by 45% by 2030, compared to base year of the 2018, in line with the goals of the Paris Agreement. We will also integrate biodiversity consideration in the rollout of the environmental management system in FAO offices worldwide. Ladies and gentlemen, FAO is leveraging the potential of agri-food systems transformation for advancing rural development, combating poverty, and eradicating hunger. And biodiversity provides sustainable solutions to multiple challenges faced by the agri-food systems and is crucial for their transformation. FAO will continue to highlight the interconnection of agri-food systems and biodiversity. On the one side, the positive contribution of biodiversity to agriculture and food security, and on the other side, the important role of agri-food systems for the sustainable use, enhancement, conservation, and restoration of biodiversity as a whole. It is important to bring this message across and support the Post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework. This is why FAO will host the global dialogue on the role of the food and agriculture in Global Biodiversity Framework, and the collaboration with the CBD Secretary. We look forward to your participation at this event. Biodiversity mainstreaming requires the engagement of farmers, fishers, livestock keepers, and foresters. Therefore, FAO brings all its policy guidance and technical expertise on agri-food systems transformation into the pool of the UN expertise. FAO has contributed and supported the UN system commitment of action launched today. We are also working closely with the UN Environmental Management Group on the phase 2 of the UN Sustainability Strategy 2020 to 2030. We needed to develop the synergy between our agencies and avoid duplication, ensure complementarity between the common approach and the ongoing consultative process on the Post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework is also crucial. We look forward to working with all of you on implementing the common approach in the years to come. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much for your message, Mr. Dong Yu-kyu. And again, thank you for stressing the necessity and also highlighting the importance of biodiversity in underpinning our food security. Thank you. The next speaker is Dr. Shamila Naya-Bedwell, Assistant Director General, United Nations Educational, Scientific and Cultural Organization, the UNESCO. Dr. Shamila, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Dr. Amina, and good afternoon, good morning, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. It's wonderful to see you all again. Thank you for inviting UNESCO to this important dialogue. First, I must apologize on behalf of the Director General, who has been taken up in another meeting and unable to join you. UNESCO is really very pleased to have contributed to the joint UN report on biodiversity, and we are looking forward to working with all of you to accelerate both the implementation of all the SDGs to halt the loss of biodiversity, as well as independent of the climate changes and social inequalities. Now, to address these, we are committed through all of our sectors, education, science, culture, and communication, which are all extremely as equally important to halt biodiversity decline. And we have decided to put biodiversity as an intersectoral strategic priority for the next 8 years of the organization. And our biodiversity strategy is actually based around 3 pillars. That is, restoring the relationship between humans and nature to regenerate the ecosystems, conserving the harmony of our ecosystems, and also amplifying the power of youth. Now, I would like to say here that the biodiversity strategy of UNESCO is fully aligned with the Post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework. And with that in mind, I would also like to say that we are fully committed to the UN Common Approach and nature-based solutions. And we contribute to the global mobilization initiatives, such as the UN Decade on Ocean Science, given that we host the Oceanographic Commission, the Coalition for Nature, which we are co-leading with UNEP with great pleasure, and of course the UN Decade on Ecosystem Restoration in our capacity as a collaborating agency, working also with UNEP in this regard. So how are we going to contribute to the biodiversity decline? Well, at UNESCO, we will use the unique networks of designated sites. UNESCO is home today to 252 natural World Heritage Sites, 517 biosphere reserves, 169 global geoparks, and all of these cover 6% of the Earth's landmass. And these are key tools for transformations for achieving the targets of the 2020 biodiversity agenda. We look forward to working with you in all of these programs and to making environmental and climate education also a core curriculum component in all countries by 2025. Now, many of these sites which I have mentioned are extremely important in implementing the restoration activities, and the natural World Heritage Sites and the core areas of the biosphere reserves protect some of the most intact ecosystems of the planet, and they provide the basis for restoration efforts in wider landscapes. Today, 250 million people call 714 biosphere reserves their home, and they are willing to share the restoration and activities that they implement and scale these up to other parts of the world. But for transformation to happen and for it to be long-term, it is very important to mobilize beyond our constituencies and to mobilize all sectors to create long-term partnerships, such as the one we are building with the private sector, like the deluxe agency called LVMH, with whom we are working to halt deforestation activities in the Amazon biosphere reserves. These are really very important partnerships, and we count on other partners as well. We also count on the support of dedicated member states, as we have demonstrated recently in the partnership we have instituted together with the government of Italy. And these partnerships are extremely important and will contribute to the upcoming G20 in July. Italy has also provided an exceptional contribution to an international network of experts to restore ecosystems in UNESCO's designated sites and training youth to green jobs for the next 5 years. These are important initiatives, and we look forward to working with you as well to ensure that this is scaled up in other parts of the world. But as important as concrete actions in countries, the engagement, as I said, of everyone is very important. A key transformation is about our relationship with nature and other living species. We need to devise ways of living together on Earth. In particular, we must develop and better manage areas where the conditions are met for a respectful relationship between humans and nature, beyond the protected areas, such as the model of the UNESCO Biosphere Reserves. So over and above of protecting part of the Earth's surface, UNESCO wishes to mobilize and engage its programs and partners to reconcile 100% of the world's population with the rest of nature that we are part of. And so UNESCO's call for the reconciliation of humans with nature through all of its programs, education, culture, science, communication, favors the transdisciplinary cooperation of the scientific community, indigenous people, local communities, and education for sustainable development. And this must be amplified and owned by major leaders and actors of transformation. So during the World Conference on Education for Sustainable Development held last week, there was a strong focus on strategies of how to harness education to address interconnected global challenges. And UNESCO urged making environmental and climate action a core curriculum component in all countries by 2025. So, dear colleagues, transformation is embedded in our actions, resulting from shared values that constitute a culture of living and the ethics of care that includes all our knowledge, cultures, value, and how to be able to transmit the diversity, the beauty, and the richness of life on Earth. And we need all of us to be part of this call for reconciliation. Now, UNESCO was established after the ravages of the Second World War. As stated in our Constitution, since wars begin in the minds of men, it is in the minds of men that peace must be constructed. So we need to consider our role towards peace for and with nature. With that in mind, in 1997, the General Conference of Member States of UNESCO actually adopted the Declaration on the Responsibilities of the Present Generation towards Future Generations. So to us, it is crucial to promote intergenerational equity. And all of the intergovernmental, international scientific programs of UNESCO and throughout the centers of excellence we have created over the last 75 years of our mandate are really in the spirit, that is to ensure no one is left behind, which is why the member states of UNESCO also endorsed recently a draft recommendation on open science to ensure that everyone has equal access to the advances of science, technology, and information in order to address people, planet, and prosperity. And we do hope that this particular recommendation will contribute to protecting Mother Earth for future generations and ensuring that everyone has access to the same scientific information needed today to understand the Earth's resources. I thank you very much. We look forward to working with you. And I want to sincerely thank the EMG and especially Inga Anderson for the collaborative partnership with UNESCO. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Shamila, and thank you for driving home the message again for capacity building, which has been raised, I think, in the question time, and also the necessity to actually work with the youth because they are our future. Thank you very much for your presentation. And now we have the last speaker on the panel, Mr. Samba Thiam, Senior Development Policy Advisor to the Administrator of the UNDP. Mr. Thiam, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, moderator. Good morning or afternoon, depending on your location. My name is Samba Thiam. I'm the policy advisor to the UNDP administrator, who first of all would like to convey his sincere apologies for not being able to attend this important dialogue. But he advised me to convey these key messages to the audience and to the participants. First of all, to reiterate UNDP support for the common approach, for the UN Common Approach on Biodiversity Mainstreaming and the work of the EMG to help ensure its implementation. He also reiterates UNDP commitments to ensuring successful CBD COP and implementation for the Post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework with all the partners. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, the world is at a very critical juncture. The development path is heavily affected by climate change crisis, by the COVID-19, but also with the biodiversity loss. The 2020 Human Development Report highlights how the current model of development is broken. It shows also the level of vulnerability of the human and also the fragility of the economic development model that has governed us so far. No country has been able to achieve a high-level human development without having had a heavy material impact on environments, including biodiversity loss. Nature is and should be at the heart of our human development. We all depend on nature for everything, for air, for water, food, health, and well-being. 50% of the 169 SDG targets needs nature to be achieved. Half of the world GDP is moderately or highly dependent on nature. Business rely on biodiversity for securing a steady flow of ecosystem services, such as pollination of crops, water filtration, waste management, carbon sequestration, and climate change and climate regulation worth over 100 trillion annually. Ladies and gentlemen, CBD COP2050 and the Post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework presents a great opportunity to address the triple nature climate pollution crisis in the COVID-19 context, the decade for actions to achieve sustainable development goals, and the decade for ecosystem restoration. We need to recalibrate our economies to be able to develop with nature and to be able to invest in nature through inclusive green economy and green recovery approaches. This will require a series of systematic changes. We need to advocate for and support the implementation of a just transformation which eradicates poverty and leaves no one behind. There is a need to transform food and commodity production systems that strengthen food and water security and sustain low carbon growth. There is a need to reflect, to redirect financial flows away from net negative investments towards nature positive investments and nature-based solutions. It means therefore brokering partnership with new actors in the private sector and scaling up initiatives designed to catalyze innovative financing such as debt for nature and debt for climate swaps and green and blue bonds. UNDP fully supports the work of EMG, including proposals put forth in the EMG report on biodiversity, as well as the recently endorsed CEB Common Approach on Biodiversity. UNDP remains committed to working closely with CBD Secretariat, UNEP, FAO, ILO, UNOCHR, UNESCO, and all other UN sister agencies to support UN member states and partner from the public and private sector and civil society to forge a new social contract with nature. Now is the moment to decide if our legacy will be a decade lost or a decade of transformation. Business as usual is not an option. It's vital to work with and not against nature. I thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Mr. Thiam, and also thank you for stressing on the contract that we have and how it is so important to address all these key issues to ensure our sustained livelihoods on this planet. We were hoping to get the minister from Egypt to speak, but I think she's having some connectivity issues. She can hear us, and I don't think that she'll be coming up. Would like to hear from her, but I think we proceed with the discussion, hoping that when she gets the connectivity issue sorted out, she can join us. So I think, ladies and gentlemen and dear panelists, thank you all for your fantastic input into today's discussion. What has come out after hearing all of you and also listening, reading also the response from the questionnaires that have been, the questions have been put out to the audience, I think we all have the same interest and the same concern at heart. And we want to ensure livelihood. We want to ensure that the planet that we leave behind for our children is a better one that we have inherited from our grandparents. But how do we proceed? How do we ensure that all these agencies that we have heard today, we all, have a convergence in all our views, in all our actions, and also how do we convince the various stakeholders, be it financial, the various stakeholders that we have at our disposal, to work with us so that we take the discussion to the next level of action. I think this is what the population wants. I think this also has come out very strongly in the questionnaire that we have put, the question that we have put to the audience. How do we actually get all the stakeholders to act together? What are the resources that we put together? And I think what we are going through right now, the pandemic, has clearly underscored our connection with nature. And I think there was nothing more vivid than last year when the whole world was locked down and we saw the animals taking over our city. I think nature is trying to tell us something. Nature is trying to tell us that human beings are very much part of our ecosystem. We are not outside of it. We are very much part of it. And also, I think the message she's trying to tell us is be careful. because we are expendable species, right? Nature doesn't need us. Now, how do we, as agencies of the UN, put our heads together to address this issue, which is so vital, in how do we ensure our own livelihoods on this planet, and how do we work with nature, with what nature has given us? Do we have questions from the audience, Sebastian? Do we take some of the questions from the audience, or do we engage with the discussion amongst ourselves straight away?
So just, engage with a discussion. There have been no questions in the chat, but we can go back to the polling questions later and encourage.
Yes. Okay.
Panel.
So the floor is open for exchanges and discussion. So can we get some response from the various presentations that have been made already?
Can I say something, Amina? Is Michelle?
Please.
Well, you mentioned something that I think it's a great opportunity, how COVID-19 has shown that relationship with nature. Because if you remember, until Paris Agreement, everybody was speaking about climate change, but very few people were speaking about respect to nature and of course, on the importance of biodiversity. There was a much more small group who were understanding the relationship between that. We have also tried to advance into, and there's more than 130 countries who are agree that the right to a healthy environment should be a right, and they are looking forward to push on that as well. And there is linked to pollution as well. But one of my experiences when I was in another capacity in the past, to try to convince member states, but also different sectors in my own country, is that we usually discuss, for example, with climate change, with some of these issues, we discuss on the cost of investment, on the cost of doing things. And we usually do not discuss on the cost of undoing things or not doing the right thing. And this is something that are we talking about oceans? Are we talking about parks? Are we talking about all kinds of issues that can ensure that we respect nature and biodiversity much more than we do now? Usually people and particularly people who are in political position, and I was one of those, that's why I'm talking about that, it was to think on the short term, on the short cost, and it usually looked like a very high cost. But the truth is, and we discussed that in the past with Kristalina when she was in the World Bank and others, is that, and that's something we can discuss also, and I discussed it in the past also with IMF, is the cost of undoing can be much higher in the medium and long term. And we can have narratives that are based, if I may say, in the principles, in what we have learned in terms of the importance of nature, but we can also include the narrative of what is the cost, not only to humanity, but also to everyone, to whole society, for the planet, but also the concrete financial cost of undoing things and all the consequences that we already have seen with Ebola, with SARS, with MERS, and now with COVID-19. Because I think we need to find a narrative that includes all kinds of arguments to make people who have to take decisions, take the right decisions. How member states who feel maybe they cannot do something because they don't have enough resources, because they're always looking at the short term, how we can show them how awful it is. And I'm not saying only on human rights, of course, everything is on human rights, you might say, but which will be the consequences, economical, social, political, human consequences of not doing what needs to be done. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Michelle. You've stressed a very important point. And I think this has also come out in the survey, in the questions, that the financials. And where we're talking of the world economy as being trillion-dollar economy, and there has been so much reticence in addressing the Green Fund, which I think would have given a very important boost to preserving precisely these areas, and of course preserving the ecosystems found essentially in the south for addressing biodiversity loss. And you have mentioned climate change, of course, which are of course impacting the poorer nations, and they are the least contributors to this. But anyway, we will not go into the blame game. I think we have to look forward to see how do we put the resources at disposal, and how do we work. And I think what I have also seen very much in organization is that there tends to be a turf war as to who is doing what. But I think we have to go beyond this and see how we join forces together and how we see all the agencies of the United Nations, how we get the main as partners in the private sector, because I think this is a discussion that hasn't been coming forward, because if government, if organizations are to work, we need to actually get all the partners on board. And very often the private sector have been dismissed and say, this is a government job, but it's not. If we want to ensure our own survival, if we want to ensure, that businesses work, we want to take clean environment, if we address health issues, all these issues, we need to have the partnership. And I think we have seen the UNESCO mentioning partnership, which of course is very vital. But how do we engage to bring these partners on board so as to deliver? I think this is the expectations of the world, on the world stage, where citizens, organization, they all want deliverables. How do we get the key players who are shaping the policies on this planet to understand what you have rightly said, Michelle, how to understand that, preserving biodiversity matters, getting clean air matters. So how do we get these? How do we bring them on board? And how do we convince them to put their hands in their pocket and to actually, walk the talk, if I may say? What would be the way forward? Because this is what people want. People want actions.
Yeah,
Amina,
if I can come in here.
Please.
I think you're making an incredibly important point, and also linking back to Michelle's point that these crises that we're talking about are really interconnected crises. And I think COVID recovery enabled us to see how interconnected they are. And when you bring into the argument what Michelle was saying, looking at the multiple benefits of action vis-a-vis the costs of non-action, then you have the opportunity to address the political unwillingness, which is what the Menti threw up as being one of the key issues of importance. One of the things that we see very clearly is that while we want to engage the private sector for solutions, we also want to engage the private sector to look at not just the private sector, but all of industry, to look at also their production practices. Because very often these are the reasons why you have many of these nature losses, biodiversity losses. And so looking at responsible industry is also part of the narrative of addressing sustainable consumption and production practices. So when we're looking at the larger private sector engagement, we need to work with them for the solutions. We need to work with them for the finances. But I think we also need to work with them to make them more responsible in terms of the way they approach nature. And I think this is happening. More and more you hear, for example, in the extractive sector, the focus on environmental social governance and the importance of that in order to get the social license to operate. So I just wanted to throw that in to link both the points that you very, very nicely made just now. Thank you.
Thank you.
If I may just step in. Thank you, Amina.
Yes, Shamila, please.
Thank you. Thanks very briefly. Thank you very much for leading these interesting discussions. In terms of partnerships, we've recently also brought on board other partners besides the LVMH, which is the luxury goods producer, but also Guerlain, which produces perfumes and face creams for the world. These are also luxury products. And we've signed a new agreement with them to protect the bees in the designated sites of UNESCO in recognition of bees as the sentinels of the environment. So this partnership is a very unique partnership where the private sector has recognized the role of the environment for their own goods and therefore stepped up the mark to become more environmental friendly. And we are training women beekeepers across the world with new types of scientific advances. So these are some of the ideas that, at UNESCO we are exploring, but we have to ensure that women are also considered as we are looking at biodiversity loss, because women are the bearers of food bearers in many communities, and they never ever considered. The youth as well, but this, our ethics of care goes towards the environment, also the people who live in these fragile communities. So this is something just to share with you. But the interconnected crisis has shown us that every sector has been affected, from education, culture, science, and communication. And we need the whole of society. If we want to make an effort today towards biodiversity decline, it's the whole of society. It's a responsibility of everybody to take charge of the planet. Yeah. So that's a message.
Can I come in here?
Thank you. Thank you. Yes.
Yes, I just want to take it from where Shamila left it on. I mean, the whole society part of it. I think we all agree on the need to have policies and programs that engage all the society, including civil society organizations, private sector, also academia. But I think there is one principle that is very dear to us as a UN, is leave no one behind. And this is how do we make sure that the policies that we craft, the partnership that we foster, engages the communities at the grassroots level who depends on, for their livelihoods, on biodiversity conservation, on biodiversity protection. So I think this is something that is very important that we need to bear in mind as we engage on the implementation, as we embark in the implementation, to make sure that local communities are well engaged, to make sure that we provide the proper governance system at the local level to make sure that the local communities are not left behind. And on the financing, I think it's also very important to see how we can create conducive environment for innovative approaches for financing, but also how do we make sure that we can support countries to develop innovative approaches for financing and to harness, especially of the least developed countries, the local resources. I thank you very much.
Yeah. We have one question here, and this is about the food systems are the primary driver of biodiversity and habitat loss, and is responsible for up to 30% of anthropogenic greenhouse gas emission. Crucially, food systems can be net carbon zero, nature positive if transformed. Should we not focus on fixing the drivers of the problem? Can the FAO provide us some idea there for this question? The food systems. We still have FAO on board?
I mean,
No?
I don't think we see them, but I can add a little bit here if you like.
Please.
Okay.
Yes.
So with regard to food systems, indeed, this is one of the largest contributor to the problem, and it's been very clear that if we could focus on the food systems better, we could address the nature loss much better. But how do we do this? Our work on the International Resource Panel, along with the work of the 10-year framework of programs of the One Planet Network, shows very clearly that if you have a value chain approach, wherein you look at the whole system rather than just focus on parts of it, then you address some of what is going on, because just addressing the chemicals used or the pesticides used will not resolve the problem. What we need to understand is how all of the actors together create the kind of drivers of impact, and therefore to address those drivers. Because you have the producers on one side, you have the consumers at the end, but in the middle you have a number of middle people, the transactional people, who have a huge responsibility for what goes on. And therefore, if we don't recognize or address this value chain, then you're just focusing on the production side, or you're focusing on the consumer behavior. But you need to also understand the fragmentation that exists at the producer and the consumer end, and a much greater consolidation which exists in the middle, where the power really lies. And so if you start connecting with the political economy of food systems, if you start connecting with what is really causing the impact on human rights, what's causing the impact on nature loss, you then have a much more holistic approach to addressing this. I'm just adding but I'm sure the FAO, if anyone is around, might be able to address more. Thank you.
Thank you, Ligia. And I think we also have one comment which has come through. Great intervention. Is heartening to see how nature conservation is increasingly perceived, not only as a moral issue towards nature, but also as a moral issue towards ourselves and the future generations, as the evidence of the impact of nature loss on our lives, health, economy, and well-being have never been clearer. And this has been a comment from the WWF head, Mr. Lambertini, and I think he captures very nicely our discussion just now. So I will, in the interest of time, we'll now hear Elizabeth Merrima's video message And I'd like to thank all the participants who have now very nicely contributed to this panel discussion. So now we pass on to the video message, please. Thank you very much. Message for Elizabeth. Yes, we are very much part of the solution. Any other comments from the panelists before I hand over to Lydia? Any comments the panelists would like to make? No? If there's no more comments, I'll pass on to Lydia for the way forward, the steps ahead. Lydia?
Thank you very much, Amina, and thank you to all the panelists for some very, very strong interventions, which I think enabled us to have a really good discussion here. And so let me first summarize a little bit of some of the things that came out here, and then perhaps also speak to some of the actions going forward. When we listen to this UN system commitment that we just heard, the key messages that spoke to me from the panels was one, the importance of science and data and capacity building. This is key to enable member states to take forward whatever comes out of the global framework. Working together is a must. Almost everybody said that repeatedly. And UNESCO said very clearly the importance of mobilizing beyond our own constituencies. And that is why the work of the EMG becomes important, because the 51 UN agencies bring together a number of constituencies which are not just relevant to UNEP or UNESCO, but to everyone. And so this becomes a very important part of the discussion. Focusing on sustainable consumption and production as a key driver of change. We cannot just restore and resolve. Those are very important, but we have to also address the drivers, because going forward, this is where the change, the transformation would really happen, is looking at the drivers of the biodiversity loss. The importance of private sector engagement. This is repeatedly spoken to, both in terms of providing solutions, but also in terms of their own responsibility to nature loss. Ms. Bachelet spoke very, very eloquently on the human rights approach and the need to make that central to nature loss. She spoke to participation, looking at inequalities, and also the non-discrimination that needs to be addressed when taking this forward. That human rights approach and environmental defenders is key to any UN approach to a common approach, is absolutely key, and we are very cognizant of that. All of the speakers spoke about changing our relationships with nature, because our relationship with nature have been a very extractive kind of relationship, but we need to change that and have a duty of care, because as nature takes care of us, we need to take care of nature, because these are very much a reciprocal action and reciprocal nature of relationships. The intergenerational equity issue, we are just stewards of the future. The future, we are trustees. So we need to make sure that the children and our grandchildren have a right to the kind of lives we've had. And the way the world is going, unless we do something about it, it really is a problematic issue. The importance of nature for development and well-being. UNDP brought this up repeatedly, and the importance of debt for nature, debt swaps, and also the importance of grassroots engagement. Ladies and gentlemen, we need to go beyond words to have strong commitments and actions. And it's in this context that the work of the UN through the Common Approach and through the EMG will start focusing on global advocacy and the normative framework, but take that forward into addressing regional collaboration and looking at the regional collaboration platforms, because now with UN reform, one's in a great position to be able to leverage these opportunities very much. So looking at how knowledge sharing can be done through this. And finally, national implementation through the UN resident coordinators and UN country teams. I know we're running out of time. I could go on because this is such a rich discussion, but Amina, let me turn over to you and thank everyone very, very much for being here at the launch of these two reports. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Norina, for actually putting, summing it up very nicely. As you have rightly said, we are running out of time, so I would like to thank all the panelists for really their incisive comments and contribution. And I would like to thank the keynote speakers, even though Mrs. Yasmin was not able to present, but I think she has been very much there with us on the phone, and I'm sure she will send her contribution. So I would like to thank everybody, and I think, as you have rightly said, Lydia, is that you have really touched on some very, very key issues. sustainability, capacity building, sharing, and all these, which of course really run into the right through what the report has been trying to do. So let us now proceed with more action-driven participation from one and all to ensure that the planet that we have inherited is a planet which will be in a better shape that we will hand over to our children. So with this closing few words, I would like to thank again everybody and thank all those who have been behind and setting up the system, Sebastian, Hussein, and everybody who has really contributed to making this forum a great forum. Thank you so much for your attention and have a great day, have a great evening. Thank you.
Thank you
Bye-bye.
very much, Amina.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you, Michelle.
Thank you. Bye.